Welcome to the library. I'm Dave Patterson, one of the librarians here, and what a beautiful spring day. It feels more like summer. We opened a couple windows. Thank you for coming. This is in our series Common Read, which is a play on College of Marin, Common Read, and this is something that happens at colleges and universities where a college will pick a book. We picked Becoming Dr. Q, and everyone in the whole college or university is invited to read it for the whole year. And then it's kind of a year-long festival of talks and events and thinking around ideas in the book. So this book is, it has a lot about resilience, it has a lot about hope, perseverance, and immigration, which is our talk today. There are two more events in Common Read. One of them is coming up on Friday, April 29th here, 1 o'clock. It's The Circle of 13. It's a science fiction novel written by Bill Petrocelli. His wife owns Book Passage, and Book Passage is a wonderful independent bookstore in Corte Madera if you haven't seen it. And it's his first book, and he's going to come talk about his book. So that's coming up. You're all welcome, and it's free. And then the last event is our grand finale. Dr. Q himself is coming to Marin. Yay! Yeah, thanks to the hard work of our emeritus folks and my partner in crime, Beth Patel. Dr. Q is flying out from Baltimore, where he's a professor, and he's going to be here on Friday, May 20th, 6 o'clock for our graduation ceremony. It'll be over in the gym.
Yes.
In the gym. And you're all welcome. So you don't have to be graduating. Everyone's welcome. If you haven't been to a graduation at College of Marin, it's really inspirational. So it'll be especially so this year because Dr. Q will be our keynote speaker, our commencement speaker. And I think that's all I need to say. Once again, thank you very much for coming. And we're so honored to have Sarah McKinnon here to give our talk. And to introduce her properly is our wonderful professor of history and political science, Yolanda Bellissimo. Will you please welcome Yolanda?
Speak in the microphone, please.
Does that work? Sarah started here as a teacher in 1982, and since she's not that old, it meant she was born right before that, in San Francisco, and she was raised here in Marin. She attended the College of Marin as a student and studied French and Asian history, and was active in our performing arts department, and then went on to the University of California at Berkeley. And while she was at Cal, she studied Asian studies. She then came here to teach at the College of Marin, and she taught English as a second language, and she's now the coordinator of our non-credit ESL program. In addition to teaching and her teaching responsibilities here, Sarah holds this college together. She has served as the president of the Academic Senate since 2010. She serves on the Curriculum Committee, on the Student Learning Outcomes Council, on the GE Committee, the Planning and Resource Allocation Committee. She's the program review facilitator for us, and she is also on our Planning and Resource Allocation Committee. She's been active in the preparation of our accreditation studies, worked on two of them, and on the interim studies that are done midterm as well. And she's currently co-chair of Standard 3 of our upcoming WAS self-study. In addition to all of that, she's also our faculty go-to person. Every time something goes wrong with the technology, I ask Sarah. If I can't find something on the website, I email Sarah. And if you need a good novel to read or a Vietnamese restaurant you want to go to, or you can't find something on our website, you just go to ask Sarah. She knows all of that. It's a great pleasure that I introduce to you Sarah McKinnon.
Thank you, Yolanda. started working here back in 1982 as an ESL teacher, and I have worked with thousands of ESL students over the years, and they are the light of my life. Actually, all the stuff that she said I do, aside from teaching is what keeps me alive, and that's the best part of any day. Anyway, so I wanted to talk, first of all, about the process of becoming America as a country, because, as you know, it's a country of immigrants unless you're a Native American. And the parts of the laws that have allowed people to come have changed since the inception of the country. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So you all know this is from the Statue of Liberty. Currently it's being kind of smashed by certain people. So the US government over the last over 200 years has had differing policies of welcome and exclusion. Sometimes there's economic pushes and pulls for both the immigrants and the country. So depending on whether we need workers, we pull, and if we don't want them, we push them out, or when we have issues. There are political reasons why people come, and there's political reasons about how we say, okay, you can come. So for example, for the last 60 years, Cubans could come because they were coming from a communist country, and they were treated as refugees. But if you were coming from Haiti, or you were coming from Mexico, or from some other country, that was not the case. There's also humanitarian reasons, and often those are paired with a certain amount of guilt, considering after the Vietnam War, we had hundreds of thousands of people coming from Southeast Asia because we brought that on. And then you know that this has been happening over the last couple of years here. Again, there's a certain amount of racism in the ebb and flows of our welcoming and exclusion. There's a certain amount of reasons because of economic hardships in this country. So when things go down, we start being xenophobic when our economy is bad. And we start scapegoating whoever is the most recent group of immigrants that have arrived. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the U.S. Constitution states, the U.S. Congress has the power to establish I don't know why it says and, but it does, uniform rule of naturalization. So over 500,000 Europeans had arrived before 1800, and 597,000 slaves had been brought here through 1860. Therefore, the authors of the Constitution recognized that the residents of the original 13 states, outside again of the Native American population, were all immigrants, voluntary or forced, and their children, or they were their children of those people. And thus they made provisions for naturalization of future immigrants. The specific rules were left up to Congress, which means it has changed frequently throughout our history, depending on circumstances. For example, in 1790, the residency requirement was 2 years. In 1795, it was up to 5 years with the required declaration of intent. In 1798, it was up to 14 years with deportation provisions. And this little provision lasted 2 years, and then it was repealed. In 1802, there was a Naturalization Act, which brought it back down to 5 years with good character criteria. And in 1824, it made naturalization easier for those who entered as minors, as children. Before 1890, most immigrants to the United States were from Northern and Western Europe. Most were Protestant and included many farmers and skilled workers with a high rate of literacy who were easily assimilated. In the 1840s and 1850s, hundreds of thousands of Irish citizens fled their homeland for the US to escape famine and discrimination. In 1892, Ellis Island opened and continued operations until November 1954, during which time over 12 million immigrants were processed. After 1900, immigrants entering in the East were mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe, and mainly Catholic, Greek Orthodox, or Jewish. Many were poor and uneducated. Unlike the first group of immigrants who had settled throughout the United States, these groups stayed in major cities, keeping their language and their customs. They also provided unskilled factory labor, which competed with the American labor force. The peak year of European immigration was in 1907, when 1,285,349 persons entered the country. This is a graph showing by decade the numbers of immigrants in each decade, and you can see that the really low one towards that side is the Depression. So during the Depression, not only did people not come, but hundreds of thousands were actually deported back to Mexico. But it goes up, and then the 2011 to 2013, the last one is low because that's not a decade, that's only 3 years. Meanwhile, in the West, you'll remember the gold rush. Several thousand Chinese immigrated to California between 1848 and 1851. Over 20,000 more came in 1852 due to a crop failure in southern China. 10 to 15,000 Chinese worked on building the Transcontinental Railroad after the Civil War. The railroad was completed in 1869, and then there was a severe depression from 1873 to 1879 in the US and Europe. So there was a pull for the railroad. Now there's a push. So, true to form, the US legislature passed the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which suspended immigration of Chinese laborers to the United States for 10 years. It permitted Chinese laborers already in the United States to remain in the country after a temporary absence. It kind of sounds like Trump sending you back and then you can come back. It provided for deportation of Chinese illegally in the United States, and it barred Chinese from naturalization. The constitutional amendments that had been passed earlier had only included whites and blacks, but not Asians. Rules of naturalization were frequently adjusted and made more specific. So in the 1890s, reporting requirements included occupation, marital status, your ability to read and write, the amount of money in possession, and facts regarding physical and mental health, in order to determine the admissibility based on an expanding list of grounds for exclusion. In 1903, they added to the list of inadmissible aliens, in particular, political opinions. In 1906, they made English a requirement for naturalization. And in 1917, they excluded illiterate aliens and broadened the Chinese exclusion to Asians in general. The interesting thing is, if you know people who are getting their citizenship now, many of these questions are still part of the list of questions we ask. In 1924, there was an Immigration Act passed, and it created quotas for European immigrants. The top group was Great Britain and Ireland, and then Germany, then Poland. Italy, France, and Romania. As a result of these quotas, most of the refugees fleeing Europe before World War II were barred from entering the United States. Immigration patterns of the 1930s were dominated by the Great Depression, which hit the US hard and lasted over 10 years. In the final prosperous year of 1929, there were 279,678 immigrants reported, but in 1933, only 23,000 came to the US, and more people left than came. So, together with the Immigration Act of 1924 was the National Origins Act of 1924. And this excluded all classes of Chinese immigrants and banned immigration from Asia entirely. And Angel Island hosted an immigration station from 1910 to 1943. So anyone returning to California were interrogated extensively and either allowed to enter or sent back to China or other country of origin. I should mention the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco had kind of banner consequences for the Asian population because the immigration offices in San Francisco burnt down and all the records burnt down as well. So. The National Origins Act of 1924 was not repealed until 1943, and Chinese were finally allowed to become naturalized citizens. And the US Congress instituted a quota of 105 Chinese immigrants a year. Returning back to California, before the gold rush, over 80,000 Mexicans already lived in the lands that would become part of the US Southwest in 1948. So this is a reminder of what it looked like in 1845. And all of that land that you now know as Colorado and California, Nevada, and Arizona, etc., and much of Texas belonged to Mexico. In 1848, this all changed. And Mexico looks like Mexico looks currently. But all those people were still up there in those other territories. So between 1848 and 1920, immigration kind of ebbed and flowed from the south. So altogether, over 25,000 Mexicans came to California during the gold rush. And more started in the 1890s in response to the US need for agricultural and railroad workers. So they were building the Santa Fe Railway, the one in the Southwest. And then due to the Mexican Revolution, close to 900,000 people fled the war into the US between 1910 and 1920. Interestingly, Mexico was not part of the quota system set up by the Immigration Act of 1924. The majority were here legally because it was easy to enter. Until 1924, you paid 5 cents to cross the border with a visa. They worked across the United States, sharecropping in California, Louisiana, and Texas, harvesting sugar beets in Montana and Minnesota, laying railroad tracks in Kansas, mining coal in Utah and Oklahoma, and packing meat in Chicago and assembling cars in Detroit. By 1930, the US Census counted 1.42 million people of Mexican ancestry, and 805,535 of them were US born, up from about 700,000 in 1920. In 1929, visa rules tightened, and 400,000 Mexicans and Mexican Americans who were US citizens were sent back to Mexico thousands against their will. But after World War II broke out, workers were again needed, and the Bracero program was started, allowing for temporary contract laborers from Mexico. Over the following 2 decades, more than 4 million Mexican farm workers arrived in the US under this guest worker program. From 1954, for several years, Mexicans were also deported. Trump has mentioned this about Eisenhower deporting people. Illegal immigration increased because the American growers still needed labor, and they found it cheaper. In 1965, there were the Immigration and Nationality Act amendments. These eliminated the national origins quota system, but they maintained the principle of numerical restriction. They expanded the limits to world coverage by limiting Eastern Hemisphere immigration to 170,000. They placed a limit on Western Hemisphere immigration, 120,000 for the first time. But neither the preference categories nor the 20,000 per country limit were applied to the Western Hemisphere. The result of this was to rectify decades of discrimination to a large degree. The diversity of the United States has then changed significantly since 1965. 1975 to 1977 allowed for refugee status and subsequently permanent resident status for the Indochinese after the Vietnamese War. In 1978, they combined the limits for Eastern and Western Hemisphere immigration into one worldwide limit of 290,000. This is annual immigration. In 1980, the Refugee Act decided that refugees were no longer a category of the preference system, and they instituted a worldwide ceiling of annual immigration to the US at 270,000, but this did not include refugees. So what is a refugee, you might ask? So this is a quotation. Refugee status or asylum may be granted to people who have been persecuted or fear they will be persecuted on the account of race, religion, nationality, and/or membership in a particular social group or political opinion. Refugees are generally people outside of their country who are unable or unwilling to return home because they fear serious harm. And I'd like to note that the political opinion provision is somewhat subjective according to the US government. And it also does not include when you fear persecution for gang violence and criminal issues in your country, which is a major issue now. In 1986, the Immigration Reform and Control Act gave a pathway to citizenship for 2.7 million undocumented people in the late 1980s. This was Reagan's amnesty. At that time, College of Marin helped many in Marin meet the English requirements through our non-credit ESL program. One last part of the immigration is temporary protected status, or TPS. This is a temporary benefit that does not lead to permanent resident status or give any other immigration status. However, it's offered to those from countries with ongoing armed conflict or environmental disasters. This was offered in the late 1990s and a little bit later to El Salvadorans after the 2001 earthquake, and to Hondurans and Nicaraguans after Hurricane Mitch, and more recently to Haiti and to the Nepalese, as well as from certain countries in the Middle East or Africa due to civil wars. Currently on the list is El Salvador, Guinea, Haiti, Honduras, Liberia, Nepal, Nicaragua, Sierra Leone, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. So just to review why people come. Clearly it's for persecution. It's often because of a famine. It's often because of natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, etc. It's often because they perceive physical danger from the threat of wars, or they're in physical danger from actual wars, or they're in the middle of displacement or diaspora after a war or during it. And then also just because they want education and a better life. In the late 1970s, the non-credit ESL program was created at College of Marin to serve the burgeoning immigrant influx. Refugees and asylum seekers were a big part of our student body in the 1980s. The end of the Vietnam War in 1975 and the subsequent Vietnam-Chinese War resulted in a massive exodus of Vietnamese and ethnic Chinese from Vietnam. More came due to the Cambodian genocide in 1980, and also from the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and from the civil wars in El Salvador and Guatemala in their 80s and early 90s. And we also had students from Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, Eritrea, China, and the Soviet Union. In addition, in the 1970s and 1980s, Mexico was going through a series of economic disasters because of the price of oil tanked, among other things, resulting in enormous inflation and national debt to international organizations. So people were coming because they had nothing. By far the largest influx of immigrants in the late 70s through the 80s came from Southeast Asia. These were people from the countries that had filled our TV screens for 20 years, of whom we knew very little. So, as a new and exceedingly naive teacher, I occasionally gave really innocent assignments that produced surprising results. Write a paragraph about a bad day, I asked in 1982, without thinking I'd get more than I got a parking ticket. Nope. Paragraphs detailed being kidnapped by Thai pirates, being stranded on an island, spending days on the open seas in rickety boats, watching a sister drown in sight of shore because she couldn't swim. It was a devastating lesson to a new teacher. Then in 1985, I asked my class, which included Cambodians, if they'd heard that The Killing Fields had won Oscars. It turns out that they not only knew about that, but they had seen the movie. One student, a young woman, said, "Teacher, did you see how they tied up that man with the bag on his head and shot him? Teacher, they did that to my husband." This family had suffered immensely at the hands of the ensuing weeks would tell me more about their experiences, limited English or not. The matriarch of this family was, as far as we could tell, unable to read or write, but later we learned that she was legally blind and that she had something called hysterical blindness, or what is now referred to as conversion disorder, where the trauma has been so severe you just stop seeing. The level of culture shock that anyone feels in a new country was amplified for these students, as their new country, language, food, way of life, expectations, how to show respect, so many things were quite contrary to their own cultures. For them, it was a sign of respect not to look directly at someone in authority, police, teacher, potential boss. In the US, it's a sign of evasiveness and perhaps even guilt. Shaking hands was a dilemma. Grammatically, English must have a subject, so I is a frequent start to our sentences. This really irritated them. They took it to mean that we were selfish and self-centered. For the last 35 years, I've taught students from all over the world, right here at College of Marin. And it's true that ESL teachers teach English, listening, speaking, reading, writing, and of course grammar. But in non-credit ESL, we're also charged with teaching survival skills. which have evolved over the last 35 years. Until recently, I taught students how to write checks, fill out deposit and withdrawal slips, how to use a telephone book, how to look for housing and jobs in the newspaper classified sections. We still teach how to read bills and invoices, citations, fill out job applications, create resumes, and answer interview questions, and even how to do taxes at a basic level. We incorporate all of these into our classes. And now we also have to teach basic computer skills as well. We incorporate US history and government to prepare students for eventual citizenship. And most of all, we provide a safe space for them to support each other, to value each other's cultures, and to ask questions about things they don't understand about their new country. Take a minute to consider yourself as an educated human being who's suddenly plunked down in the middle of somewhere where the culture is completely different, where you don't speak the language or have any cultural references. Does this mean you're suddenly stupid? No, you're just confused and bewildered. And yet immigrants are often treated that way. They spend the next 10 to 20 years of their lives proving that they came with skills and intelligence and are worthy of our respect. I want to give you a little taste of what our students deal with. So this is only one word, the word welcome. And this is welcome in sort of basic European languages. So you've got Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, German, Danish, Swedish, Finnish. When you get to Finnish, it's getting a little out there, but you can more or less read it. All of these also say welcome. Can you read them?
No.
First one is Hmong, the Hmong people of Laos. Next one is Laotian, Khmer. I love Burmese. Oh, Burmese is falling apart there. It's very circular. You can check it out on Google Translate. It's beautiful. Okay. The rest of then we have Korean and Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, and then on the other side it starts with Mongolian, Russian, Hungarian, Arabic, Persian, Tigrinya, which is from Eritrea, and Hindi. Just saying, our students come from amazing cultures, amazing ancient languages that are probably 10 times harder than English, and they're doing 2, 3 languages. They're amazing students. And I would like to say I have had students from all of those languages. So in 2007, we did a survey of all of our students, and this is out of 654 students. This is the top 13 countries, which you can't read, but starting from the bottom there is Germany, Thailand, Nicaragua, Colombia, Korea, China, Iran, Vietnam, Brazil, Peru, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico. So that was 2007. In 2010, it flipped a little bit. These are the top 10 countries. Starts with China, Colombia, Vietnam, Haiti, Iran, Peru, Brazil, El Salvador, and then Mexico and Guatemala flipped. So I don't know if you've noticed, but we got more Guatemalans than we're counting. Would argue with me. So from that particular survey of 2010 out of 765 people, these are all the countries that were, I only showed you 10, these are the rest. This is the 50 countries. But over the years, I've been here 35 years now. The program's been here a little bit longer than that, and we keep track of where our students come from. And every time I do a new student placement test, I ask people. So at this time, we're up to 103 plus countries. This is the first half. This is the second half. And you'll notice Belgium, Sudan, Ghana, and Benin, these are not students, these are faculty. I'd like to talk a little bit about specific students. That's me, a really long time. So I'd like to give you some examples of the thousands of students who have passed through College of Marin over the last 35 years and the factors that played a part in their becoming America. There are various factors that cover all of their struggles and their successes. So the first one is the lack of a formal education. The percentage of these students at College of Marin is not that high, although many have had their educations interrupted, usually after 9th grade. However, when I first started teaching, I discovered what it meant to have had no opportunity for education, especially for women. 3 women who were alone here raising children on their own taught me so much about perseverance. The first, the daughter on the left here, she was from a village in the mountains of Laos. And each day I worked with her extra, reading from a small book about another Lao refugee. And one day she verified for me the fact that much of learning to read is the skill of predicting what a word is. Faced with the word occupation, she bravely came out with "occucumber." Why would you know occupation? The second was a Moroccan woman, and I don't have a picture of her, unfortunately. She didn't know even what the symbols stood for. She pointed to the single letters of the word how and thought the 3 of those letters symbolized how are you. That was a revelation to me. Eventually she did learn, and she learned to drive, and she raised a daughter on her own. And when her daughter was grown, she came back to College of Marin in the intermediate level. And her daughter grew up and also came to College of Marin in recent years. And this has taken place over the last 30 years. And I will say that her daughter was the student who asked Nancy Pelosi a question when Nancy Pelosi was here. The third woman I'll mention is from Eritrea. She's the one on the right here. In the late 1980s, she came to class in her traditional clothes. My memory of her story is that she fled the war and the famine in Eritrea, and that her husband had died. And in 1989, she was alone here with 5 children. I think she may have been able to write in Tigrinya, their language, but it's a totally different alphabet, so I'm not sure. But in any case, she has persevered, and she showed her children the value of education, and they all went on to university and have done very well. This is I may be in level 10, but I am a true master in my country factor. Bolokada Konde came from Kisudugu, Guinea, and he was in my level 10 class in 2007. One day he arrived fully decked out in his best African clothes, and in our best level 10 English, I learned that he had just been awarded immigrant status as an alien with extraordinary ability in the arts. I went to La Peña in Berkeley to see him play. He is a djembe master, and I have no words to describe that performance except to say if you ever have a chance to see him, do it. After a year at College of Marin, he moved up to level 20. He went on to teach at the Robert E. Brown Center for World Music at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In his case, music transcends all language, and he's able to communicate with his drum and his smile and his extraordinary enthusiasm. There's the I finally have a chance factor. American children take education for granted, but ESL students do not. In the same way that Dr. Q took his chance and ran with it, our students value the opportunities they have to learn so that they can help their children have better lives. I could say this about the young man in this picture. He brought his parents to College of Marin last year and told me that he was now working toward a master's degree at CSU East Bay. So he was my student maybe 7 years ago. So. For others, it is a chance, but not much smooth sailing, because often life throws you curveballs. There's the I have to raise my children factor. So one of the most vital aspects of community colleges is the fact that students can stop when life gets in the way, but still have the option of returning later. I think one of my best examples of this is Aida, a lovely woman from Mexico who was in one of my first classes at IVC in the early 1980s. She studied well, but then disappeared. Several years ago, I found her under a tree at College of Marin. She was back and had now made it to English 150, or had been. It was a while ago. I asked her where she had been, and she said she'd spent 20 years raising her children, but now they were grown, and it was her turn. She graduated from College of Marin, then from Dominican, and went on to get a master's in social work, and now works in Sonoma County. And I believe her children are at College of Marin. There's the, oh my God, I have to start over factor. So we have many students who are already professionals in their countries, doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects. But their professions need English, unlike Bulakada, who could use his music. So in the 1980s, I had a student from China who was a nuclear physicist, who was flipping burgers at McDonald's. With a smile, because he got to practice his English. We currently have a Syrian student with graduate engineering degrees who is a professor in Syria, but sighs again that she's starting over, but this time with a deep sense of loss and constant worry that makes it even harder for her to accomplish her goals. For the sake of her beautiful children, she's persevering and is now working in our tutoring and learning center. Here. I tried to get a picture of her, but she ignored me. I was going to have the real thing. There's the I've got to survive and I'm living in Marin County factor, coupled with I'm supporting my entire family back home factor. So according to the survey we did in 2013, out of 363 students, 29% worked 31 to 40 hours a week, and another 16% worked over 40 hours per week. Just as Dr. Q's family did, our students' families in their home countries depend on them to send money. I've often asked them what their families said to them when they left for the US, and one of their not so tongue-in-cheek answers has always been, don't come back until you send money. On occasion, world events and natural disasters spur them on to greater lengths. So the massive earthquakes and hurricanes in Central America and Haiti have spurred increased migrations at various points over the last 30 years. And more recently, one of our Nepalese students went back to Nepal after the earthquake to bring relief supplies and to try and find her family and village, which had been severely damaged. And there's the working in Marin County factor. So as an ESL teacher, I find my students everywhere and in the most surprising places. The Haitian students have most often gone into CNA elder care type of work. So when my father was dying and was in a convalescent hospital back in 2003, it was my Haitian student who took care of him. And last fall when I went in to get lab work done, There he was again. I would like to recognize a couple of former College of Marin ESL students who are working here. I've mentioned the Southeast Asian refugees. College of Marin was home to hundreds, but if not thousands, it was a lot. But one in particular stands out. You may remember him, our very own Dong Nguyen, who arrived in the early 1990s with no English. He went through our program, worked in our office, finished his degree here, went on to San Francisco State, and then came back to work for us, and then for OIM, and now in IT, and continues to make tremendous contributions to the college. Dong's wife, Connie, is from Peru and is working in the ESL office currently. And the little girl is actually 10 now. And then you have Jessie Klein. Jessie came from the Philippines and went through our credit ESL program and went on to graduate from College of Marin, and she works in community ed. That's only 3. But we have many immigrants working at College of Marin, and this is only a few of them that I could sort of figure out. I've listed them by continent because it's just easier. So we have this many that I'm writing down from the Americas, but there's many more, and especially in the custodial department. There are people, and I just don't know everybody's names. The second group is from Europe, and they include France, Italy, Yugoslavia, Russia, Sweden, and Paul Cheney's from England. And then in the Middle East and Asia, we have people from Malaysia, from Iran, from the Philippines, from Vietnam, from China, from India, from Morocco, etc. And from Africa, we have two biology faculty from the Sudan. Kofi in chemistry is from West Africa, I don't remember the exact country, as is Patrick Ekuitutu, who runs our IT program. Rose Jacques, and then there's the next 3, Patience, Patricia, and Sandra, all from South Africa. There's one. And then Olga, who works in OIM, is from Eritrea. Eritrea, Ethiopia. They're together. But anyway, there are many, many more than this, but they all bring much to our college. I've talked about the Southeast Asians earlier. Please keep them in mind in the coming years as students begin to arrive from North Africa and the Middle East. The refugee crisis in the Mediterranean Sea is very similar to what happened after the end of the Vietnam War. The common thread of their experiences is that they are alive and they have survived, and they feel a certain amount of guilt about that, which colors their day-to-day life here. Those coming from Central America currently are fleeing poverty and unemployment, but also organized crime, gang violence, conscription, rape, and murder. They live in fear for their families and friends back home. The thousands of students I've interacted with over the years have impressed me with their perseverance, their willingness to start over, their willingness to go back through the process of learning a new language, because you must be willing to be a child again when you do that. And their willingness, because they've had no choice, to leave everything they've ever known. Their ties to those countries they've left behind are powerful because they've lost so much. They send money home to their families. Their children are raised with love and hope. And College of Marin has had a tremendous impact on our immigrant community over the last 35 years. For those that come to ESL programs, these students teach their children by example that education matters, is valuable, and makes a difference in their lives and in the lives of generations to come. Students from all of these countries have brought vibrancy and diversity to the College of Marin. A lot of times, the college recognized the international students who are here on F1 visas. There's a tiny proportion of the number of immigrants and people from around the world that we have. At any one time, ESL has probably 1,600 people in our program, plus who's moved on into the regular college. And I personally, my department welcomes every single one of them with all of our love and all of our support and all of our hope for the future. Thank you. I'm sorry for one more. I don't know if anyone has questions. Cool. Thank you.
One question.
Well, good question, sorry.
When you mentioned that the ESL students are on levels, from
So level 10 is the beginning.
10 is the beginning.
10 is the beginning, and we go up through level 80, and then 98 and 120 are the English department levels. Yeah. Level 10 is the start. Hi, Bob.
I've known Sarah for 30 plus years,
It's another ESL teacher.
and I used to teach ESL with Sarah. I'm just blown away by this presentation. This
Thank you.
is unbelievable. I think what I would like to raise is this issue that I am often faced, and that is, I signed up to view the Sonoma International Film Festival, and I said, how come there aren't any films from Asia? You know, when the people in Asia represent 60% of humanity. And he wrote back and said, well, we tried to get films from all the countries, but we actually had 700 entries, but we got movies from 24 countries. And so I did the math, 24 out of 196 is 12%, which means 88% of the countries are not represented. And yet they call themselves an international film festival. And so my complaint is that too often in this society, that's how we view the world. That is basically Eurocentric, right? And so we don't think of people, namely of color. I mean, there weren't any films from Africa. And I told them, I said, you know, the biggest film industry in the world is India. It produces 1,300 films. There wasn't a single film from India. And so he said, if you continue to harass me and seek legal action, why do you need to be, you know, complaining about that? So I'd like your take on this.
You want my take on that?
Yes.
Do I have a take? I don't know. I don't know what people think. I don't know. I don't know if it's money, I have an idea for Sonoma what the issue is. Here, when they've done, we used to do film festivals in the modern languages department, and it depended on the countries that we were teaching. So Japan and China were included because we were teaching those languages. I don't know about Sonoma. Yeah. Other questions? Issues, problems? Thank you so much. Go out and be happy.